In the next halacha in Likutei Halachos, Hilchos Hashkamas Haboker Gimel, Reb Nosson again looks at the halachas of waking up, this time with a slightly different approach. Reb Nosson speaks a lot about the concept of tikkun chatzos. This was something that was done by tzaddikim in every generation, but by Breslovers, it's a very strong Indian to try to wake up chatzos and to do the tikkun chatzos, which I think we mentioned in previous recordings, which are printed in some sidurim, tikkun Rachel, tikkun Leah. There are different piyutim, paragraphs, psukim, things to say to enable a person to mourn over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And this was something that Reb Nachman stressed very much. Obviously, every person needs to know their own life circumstances, what things take priority, what will that mean for the rest of a person's day. It could be that there are certain times in a person's life where this is not really completely relevant, but even then, if a person doesn't do it every day, maybe a person can do it once a week, a person can do it once a month, a person can do it once a year, hopefully more than once a year. But this is something that was constantly on the mind of Breslover Hasidim as a very, very important avoda and part of Avodas Hashem. So Reb Nosson goes on a teaching from Rabbi Nachman in Torah Samach Beis 62 in Likutei Maran, that again the whole Likutei Halachos is really a commentary on applying the different teachings of Rabbi Nachman to different areas of halacha to demonstrate the depth of those halachos. And in Torah Samach Beis, Reb Nachman draws a distinction between two kinds of questions that a person can have as it relates to Hashem. One kind of question there are answers for, just something a person doesn't know, a person doesn't understand really what these things mean, and you can explain it, and that's okay. And that's one part of the questions that rise up in our heart and soul, and about those, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us that a person needs to know what to answer, and these are questions that have answers, and a person needs to investigate and to try to get clarity in their own emunah, and those things can be understood. They are able to be understood. But there's another kind of question which is fundamentally unanswerable. Reb Nachman also makes reference to this concept in Torah Samach Dalid in Likutei Maran a couple of lessons later, where there's a certain kind of question that comes from a place where there is no ability for the human being to grasp the answer. There are questions that are paradoxical. There are questions that are rooted in a place that's beyond place, in a time that's beyond time. And our human brains are fundamentally incapable of understanding these things. We're limited. We're just human beings. And that requires a person to just go into emunah. And it's not an emunah that's like the leap of faith kind of emunah, where something's completely irrational. But if it's within a rational system and we're able to understand that fundamentally there are things that are not understandable to us humans, so then there's a place where the proper and appropriate response is for a person just to rely on what we are able to understand and the context surrounding these questions and the theology where these questions are understandable because we're not Hashem and are going to naturally be things that we don't understand, and for a person to go in with emunah alone. Reb Nosson in Likutei Halachos here tells us that the nighttime is the aspect of these questions, where everything is dark, we don't have clarity, and we're not able to see in front of us, we're not able to take the next step forward because we don't understand. And that's what the nighttime represents. And sleeping represents this concept where a person is going to a different state of consciousness. Now, generally speaking, when we speak about sleeping, and we're going to learn this as Hashem as it relates to the halachas of Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, but oftentimes we think about sleeping as a person going into a subconscious state where a person is less connected to emunah. And that's also true, and there's an aspect of that. But there is an aspect here where Reb Nosson says, on the contrary, going to sleep means consciously rising above our thoughts, where our brain is not functioning like it usually does, and our rational thought patterns aren't functioning. A person is in a dream state, catatonic, a person is sleeping, and in that state, that's the aspect of emunah. And Reb Nosson says that that's the appropriate response when a person is dealing with challenges and questions and everything is dark. We go to sleep. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put it into the Anhagas HaTava that a person responds to darkness, a person responds to existential obscurity and a lack of clarity by going to sleep. And sleeping means that a person is overcoming their rational brain and a person recognizes there are things that are beyond that require emunah. But Reb Nosson explains that actually there are two halves of the night. There's the first half of the night when the tzaddikim would sleep mamish, and then in the middle of the night, beginning of the second half, they would rise up in tikkun chatzos. And Reb Nosson explains that the first half of the night relates to the questions that come from a place where we have no answer for them. It's fundamentally impossible for us to answer those questions, and therefore the only response is for a person to sleep. And that's why sleeping relates to the first half of the night, which is connected to those questions that come from a place where there's no answer that's even relevant. We can't explain it. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu complaining about and really protesting and expressing his shock and surprise over this, that Rabbi Akiva suffered such a terrible death. And he said, Zu Torah v'zu schayra. This is the reward for the sacrifices that Rabbi Akiva made to be connected to Torah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, shtok. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm not going to give you the answer because you're not capable of understanding it, all the while that you're in a guf, in a body. You're not able to understand these things. These are things that come from beyond. Kach Allah b'machshava. These are things that require you to rise above your rational brain. And therefore, the only thing that you can do while you're still in the body is shtok, is silence. And this is the aspect of sleep of the first half of the night. But the second half of the night, a person's waking up. A person's waking up, Chatzos Laila. And David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Chatzos Laila Akam, Lahaydes Lach, Al Mishpatei Tzidkecha. At Chatzos, David HaMelech says, I would rise to thank you, Lahodes Lach, to praise you, Al Mishpatei Tzidkecha, upon the strictures and the guidance of your laws, the Mishpatim. Says Reb Nosson, Mishpatim is an aspect of laws, like Halachos, which we know David HaMelech was a tremendous posek. But in addition to meaning laws, it could just mean harsh judgment. Mishpatim. And David HaMelech is saying that those harsh judgments that require us to reconcile HaKadosh Baruch Hu's goodness with a lot of the pain that we experience both personally and collectively and nationally and on a human scale and throughout all of existence. There's so much din in the world. There's so much harsh judgment in the world. But there are ways that we're able to explain why there are certain things that happen that give us the capacity to at least pretend as if we know for sure that the things that are happening to us are kapara, or that somehow kol mada avid rachmana letav avid, that there's some way that we can actually see how sometimes the things that happen to us that don't appear to be good on the surface turn out in the end to really have been for our best, and we can glimpse that, we can see that. So David HaMelech rises at Chatzos in order to sweeten those judgments, in order to discover the way that we could thank Hashem for the difficult things that we go through. So the first half of the night, the difficulties that we're facing are so incredibly vast that no amount of answers are going to help. A person looks at the 6 million, a person witnesses October 7th, a person witnesses things that are beyond our capacity to give an answer for, and even to say, oh, it was a kapara, and that's nowhere near sufficient, right, to cover the enormity of such a tragedy. So about those questions, you just have to shluf, just have to sleep. And that's the aspect, again, of going deep into Amunah, so that when you wake up in the morning, chadashim labakarim, you wake up new in the morning, rabba Amunah secha, your Amunah has been deepened, because the only way to deal with that is by going into a place of silence and submission. But the second half of the night, when a person is dealing with things that can be addressed, so then Chatzos Laila Akam Lahaydes Lach, where David HaMelech says there is a way of thanking Hashem al Mishpatei Tzidkecha, to deal with the difficulties, the challenges, the ways that we are able to answer those questions on our Emunah, and that's the aspect of waking up at Chatzos Laila. As Hashem will continue with this Halacha, Hilchas Hashkamas Habayikar Halacha Gimel in Likutei Halachos, and then
ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני